Okay, let's unpack this. We are stepping into a world that is just defined by the collapse of hope, a world where humanity built these colossal gods just to watch them fall. Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into what might be the most profoundly tragic figure in the entire Jaeger program, Crimson Typhoon.
And when you look at the source materials, you realize this isn't just the story of a defeat. It is a true study of fate. Crimson Typhoon was not just a machine, it was the absolute symbol of human ingenuity reaching its absolute peak.
A peak that immediately preceded, and you could even argue, caused its catastrophic failure.
Exactly. This entire story, it's a Greek tragedy written in steel and plasma and nuclear energy.
Right. The default narrative we often see is so short and brutal. A spectacular giant appears, it spins a few blades, and then it gets decapitated. It's over in minutes. But our deep dive into the confidential reports, the original blueprints, it reveals something far more nuanced, something heartbreaking, and something that was fundamentally doomed from its very inception.
That's it. That's why we have to treat Crimson Typhoon not as some kind of failed weapon, but as the absolute poster child for wasted potential. It was a perfect design, driven by a non-repeatable biological miracle, yet its destruction was never just some random, unfortunate battlefield defeat.
Yeah.
It was a calculated, premeditated murder.
And that's our mission today for you, our listener. We're going to uncover the story that the official history, well, it just didn't have time to tell. The secret international collaboration that created its incredible power.
The irreplaceable human cost of its pilots.
And the tragic circumstances that left them fighting what was, let's be honest, essentially a suicide mission. A mission that was defined long before the engines even roared to life. To really understand the inevitability of this machine's fall, we have to start with the foundational rules of the Jaeger program. The one unbreakable law that Crimson Typhoon dared to violate.
The power of two.
Exactly, the power of two.
It was the bedrock of everything. The drift technology, the fundamental mechanism that allowed humans to pilot these giants. It wasn't just connecting minds, it was mimicking the very structure of the human brain.
Two hemispheres, two operators.
Right. Two people, two minds, fusing into a singular operational consciousness, a state they called the neural handshake.
And the PPDC, the Pan Pacific Defense Corps, their scientists weren't just cautious about this rule. They were. They were absolutely dogmatic. Trying to connect three minds simultaneously, they declared, was theoretically impossible.
And they'd run the numbers, they calculated the risk, the neural noise generated by trying to process three distinct massive streams of information. It would be so overwhelming.
Overwhelming how?
Either it would induce an immediate fatal psychological shock in the pilots, their minds would just break, or, failing that, the resulting feedback loop would just instantly fry the Jaeger's extremely complex, very delicate neural systems.
So is this established golden line you just do not cross?
Absolutely. The physical safety of the machine, the sanity of the pilots, it all depended entirely on that singular bipolar structure. And yet, this is where that theme, that human arrogance, enters the picture. Because China introduced the exception that ultimately sealed their machine's doom, the Wei Tang brothers.
Our sources frame this not as some scientific achievement. They didn't manufacture the solution.
No, not at all.
It was presented as an unrepeatable biological miracle.
Yeah, and you have to think about the context here. Other nations were spending billions on psychological compatibility testing, trying to find just two people who wouldn't tear each other's minds apart in the drift.
And the Wei Tangs.
They didn't need any of that testing. They were identical triplets.
Which means their neural compatibility wasn't just high.
It was you have to think about the level of synchronization we're talking about here. It wasn't three separate individuals trying to agree on which arm moves left or which foot goes forward. They shared the same genetic template, their cognitive processing, their reaction times, even their subtle emotional responses were nearly indistinguishable.
So they were, for all practical purposes.
A singular, incredibly powerful consciousness that just happened to be split into three distinct, perfectly synchronized physical bodies.
That is genuinely terrifying from a logistical standpoint, but militarily, my God, it was gold.
It was. They had stumbled upon a genetic rarity, a non-repeatable biological phenomenon.
But this uniqueness, this profound biological singularity, it guaranteed the tragedy that followed. The seeds were sown right there.
They were. The standard Jaeger development process across the world was, frankly, desperate. You build the hardware, the physical robot, and then you spend months, sometimes years, just desperately trying to find two pilots who could endure the immense mental strain of the drift.
The Wei Tangs just eliminated that entire process for China.
China did the opposite. And this, for me, this is the core of their fatal hubris. They realized they possessed the most advanced human software on the planet. This incredible, unique trio. And instead of trying to shoehorn these three amazing minds into an existing two-person machine...
They decided to build the machine around the men?
Exactly. They invested vast sums, we're talking potentially hundreds of billions of dollars, to build the hardware Crimson Typhoon to perfectly match the pilot's unique three-way neural specifications.
And that's why we get the three arms. That's so vital to the story.
Yes, they were an aesthetic choice or some kind of random design upgrade. They were a direct result of the pilot situation. The design reports actually state that the third arm was a necessary outlet for the surplus neural processing power the triplets provided.
So no one else could pilot it?
No one. Only the Wei Tangs could handle that level of operational complexity. The reports say no other human mind or even any compatible pair of minds could possibly manage the simultaneous complex inputs required for a three-armed Jaeger with that degree of speed and coordination.
So what we're looking at is a weapon that is essentially a custom-made suit. A perfect, exquisite piece of operational art. But that very perfection was the root of its greatest weakness.
It was. Our sources confirm that this absolute singularity meant that if Crimson Typhoon fell, there was literally no replacement strategy.
You couldn't just swap in two new pilots.
The machine becomes a billion-dollar piece of useless metal the moment the Wei Tangs are incapacitated.
And that right there is the core tragedy of its existence, isn't it?
It really is. China poured all of its potential, all of its technological genius into a single, specialized platform. A platform tied entirely to a non-repeatable biological fluke.
It was the most exclusive and dangerous weapon humanity owned.
But that exclusivity meant the stakes were absolute from the very beginning. I mean, building a weapon that relies on a unique set of triplets is, by definition, a fated choice.
It made their very first deployment a potential suicide mission.
Exactly. Not because the Jaeger was weak, but because its operating system was irreplaceable. They built a single point of failure and then entrusted the fate of their entire nation to it.
And if they went down, the blueprint, the design, the neural miracle, it all went down with them. The cost of that gamble was absolute. Okay, so China had successfully secured the biological miracle, this unparalleled human software in the Wei Tang triplets, and they built the unique three-armed architecture to match it. But even with that incredible national advantage, they couldn't build the entire Jaeger body alone.
Oh, they couldn't.
They were missing crucial, high-end, specialized technology.
And that's the next piece of this doomed puzzle. The core power systems, the defense systems, they were incomplete. It necessitated this doomed collaboration with global superpowers, despite the obvious national pride involved in building such a unique machine.
So they had to go to the table.
They did. They essentially went to the international technological table and said, look, we have the brain, but we need you to help us build the muscle and the skeleton.
The political maneuvering around this must have been just immense.
Oh, for sure. You look at the records, Australia, which was obsessively focused on perfecting its own machine, Stryker Eureka, they essentially refused to share anything.
They saw China's rise as a competitive threat in this Jaeger arms race.
Exactly. But two other major players did step up, and their contributions were absolutely critical to making Crimson Typhoon the legend it became.
While also embedding the seeds of its own destruction.
First up was Japan.
Right.
Japan had specialized heavily in speed and mobility, particularly with their earlier lighter models like Tacit Ronin. They handed over some of their most prized secrets. We're talking high-tension hydraulics, speed, aerodynamics.
And the Chinese engineers didn't just copy and paste it.
No, they were brilliant. They adapted this core technology, focusing specifically on the lower chassis and the leg design. They developed this unique system of magnetic tension stabilizers and inertia dampeners.
And the result was?
Genuinely astonishing. For its colossal size, Crimson Typhoon didn't lumber or walk like the heavier, armor-focused Russian or American counterparts.
It glided.
It glided.
It's often described as having impossible agility. It could maintain momentum and change direction with a fluidity that just defied its scale.
Mm-hmm. And you have to frame that speed as this brief, fleeting advantage against the inevitable entropy of the Kaiju War. It was a momentary spark of hope that suggested maybe, just maybe, technology could overcome physics.
But ultimately, that speed was also what allowed it to become overconfident. It's what got it caught where it never should have been.
But the collaboration that provided the greatest hidden strength and the greatest hidden doom was with the United States.
Okay, so what did they bring to the table?
Well, our sources indicate that the general movie narrative actively, maybe even deliberately, obscured the true nature of Crimson Typhoon's ultimate weapon. On screen, the only thing we ever saw consistently was the retractable wrist blades spinning in this blur.
Which earned it that famously reductive nickname, the giant blender.
Which is such a massive disservice, a complete misrepresentation of its power.
So what's the truth?
If you look at the original design reports and the concept blueprints, which we've been able to review, the design is fundamentally asymmetrical.
And in engineering, asymmetry screams function over form.
Always. You have to ask, why is that left arm so monstrously robust? Why does it have that huge, layered, protective shoulder shielding, vastly bigger and more complicated than the shoulder on the right?
It wasn't aesthetics.
It was pure, specialized, deadly function. The U.S. provided experimental energy technology they were developing for their own advanced Mark V designs. That bulky, reinforced shoulder protection, it hid something utterly critical.
What?
A second independent nuclear reactor.
A second reactor. Wait, most Jaegers ran on one powerful core. That's double the volatile power source, double the risk of a breach. Why on earth would they take that gamble?
Because that second reactor wasn't dedicated to movement or life support or any of the standard functions.
So what was it for?
It was dedicated exclusively to powering a concealed energy weapon. A super plasma cannon hidden and integrated within that monstrous left arm structure.
You're kidding me. So the Chinese built a bipedal robot with 3 arms, designed for close quarters combat and speed. And then they secretly bolted on what was essentially the ultimate long-range weapon.
Precisely. We are talking about a weapon, according to those original concept calculations, that was 2 or 3 times more powerful and far more concentrated than the standard plasma cannon installed on Gypsy Danger.
And Gypsy's was a sustained blast.
Right. Crimson's was designed for a focused, destructive single shot, for precision.
That just turns the whole dynamic on its head.
Yeah.
China didn't just build a brawler.
No.
They built a nuclear sniper. A concentrated shot capable of piercing a Category V Kaiju or maybe even a Category V from side to side. It was a weapon capable of delivering instantaneous clean death from a distance. The exact opposite of what the wrist blades suggest.
And that is the ultimate bitter irony of Crimson Typhoon. It was one of the most devastating weapons in the entire Jaeger arsenal, a concealed ultimate deterrent, and yet the world only ever saw the giant blender spin.
Its full, devastating potential remained tragically unfulfilled before the ultimate catastrophic failure in Hong Kong.
This secret power, the one thing that might have turned the tide instantly, it just lay hidden, unused, and ultimately wasted.
It's an apocalyptic symbol of human technological hoarding, even in the face of our own annihilation. So we had this unparalleled technological achievement, custom-built, secretly armed to the teeth, and piloted by an absolute biological miracle. The result in the early years of deployment was, predictably,
flawless, spectacular victories. They were untouchable.
their operational record was spotless.
And Crimson Typhoon's combat style was a spectacle of speed, precision, and power. It was the exact spectacle the world desperately needed to maintain morale. And in a gesture that we can now recognize as the height of human arrogance, just pure confidence built on an unbroken streak of perfection, China agreed to lend its jewel for critical missions on other Pacific coasts.
They were exporting their symbol of strength, letting it become a global military ambassador.
And that one decision, set the stage for the inevitable turning point. The moment physics and fate decided to deliver their cruelest blow to the Wei Tang triplets.
So what happened?
While Crimson Typhoon was executing one of these high-profile, confident missions far from home, sensors detected a new Kaiju signature emerging from the breach. But this one wasn't a random target. It was a Category 3 with a singular, terrifying trajectory aimed directly at the Chinese coastlines.
The pilots received the immediate order to return to Shanghai.
Immediately. They pushed Crimson Typhoon's dual-reactor engines to the absolute limit, crossing the vastness of the Pacific in this desperate, fated race against time.
But this is where the cold, indifferent law of physics steps in to deliver the tragedy.
Right. A colossal machine, even one that glides like Crimson Typhoon, is still bound by the constraints of speed, distance, and the relentless ticking of the clock.
That journey must have been just agonizing. A desperate trial. You can imagine the stress on the triplets, linked by this singular, anxious consciousness, knowing every single second mattered.
Mm-hmm. Knowing the lives of their countrymen hung on their ability to beat that clock. They were battling distance and their own internal limits simultaneously.
But when they finally reached the Chinese coast, they were too late.
Too late. The Kaiju had already made landfall, and this is the moment the pilots faced the devastating violation of their most sacred operational rule. They had crossed the line.
Tell us more about that line. We hear the term miracle mile thrown around. What did that truly signify in Jaeger strategy?
The miracle mile was the absolute, inviolable boundary. It was the crucial battle line, this 10-mile radius extending from the shore. The entire Jaeger defense strategy was built on one principle: stop the monster at sea, in that buffer zone.
To protect civilians.
Exactly. That zone was designed to protect the civilian population, minimizing collateral damage and ensuring the battle was fought in the sterile, forgiving environment of the deep ocean.
But that line broke that day. Crimson Typhoon arrived to find the Kaiju already deep inside the populated zone.
They had no choice. They had to enter combat not in the sterile Pacific, but in the middle of a densely populated, sprawling metropolis.
The fight was brutal, fraught with these split-second decisions, not just about killing the Kaiju, but about minimizing the fallout.
And technically, they won. The monster fell dead within city limits. It was a military victory, flawlessly executed by the triplets under impossible pressure.
But the sources, they all emphasize that this was a humanitarian catastrophe, a bitter victory that permanently altered the Wei Tangs. Describe the sheer scale of that failure for us.
The details are just devastating. While the Kaiju was defeated, the sheer force of the Jaeger's movements, the sonic booms, the collateral damage from the arm blades, and the falling monster, the destruction was immense.
We're talking of millions of lives lost in the unavoidable crossfire.
Entire residential and commercial buildings collapsing with people still inside who hadn't had time to evacuate.
So they won the battle, but they failed their only real mission.
Their only mission that mattered: to protect their people.
And for 3 individuals linked in a unified consciousness, carrying the mental burden of such profound devastation, it must have been psychological annihilation.
It was an operational and a moral collapse. They were designed to be saviors, and they had just witnessed and actively participated in mass destruction. That crushing existential sense of failure shattered the pilots' unified heart and permanently sealed the Jaeger's strategic movements.
They were operating with broken hearts.
They were. Carrying the weight of a ruined city on their shoulders, they had faced the ethical nightmare of war, and in their own minds, they lost.
And the reaction from the Chinese government was immediate. It was sharp, and it was permanent, cementing the Jaeger's path to utter doom.
They issued an unbreakable, absolute decree.
Crimson Typhoon, the world's greatest symbol of hope, would never leave Chinese territorial waters again.
The calculus was clear. Its power was too valuable to decommission. But the risk of another civilian catastrophe and the further psychological damage to their irreplaceable pilots was just too high to risk an external deployment.
It is an iron decree of self-imprisonment.
Mm-hmm.
And this detail provides crucial context for the entire final battle in the Pacific Rim War. It explains why the last remaining Shatterdome, the final base of human resistance, was located in Hong Kong. It wasn't a strategic choice based on infrastructure or location.
No, it was a necessity forced by politics and psychological trauma. The PPDC knew they desperately needed Crimson Typhoon's unparalleled speed and power for the final offensive, but they also understood that China would not allow their caged guardian to move a single inch out of its territory.
So the trap was set. If the PPDC wanted the ultimate power of Crimson Typhoon,
the global defense effort had to move to him. The entire world resistance had to shift its core operations to suit this single, geographically caged, irreplaceable Jaeger.
Crimson Typhoon was now waiting in Hong Kong. Not for its next mission.
No, for its inevitable ambush. It was a sitting duck, relying only on the false assumption that its brute force and renowned speed would be enough to ward off any attack.
Which brings us to the inevitable, fated conclusion. The fall of Crimson Typhoon was not a failure of hardware. It wasn't a failure of pilots. It was a failure of intelligence. It was a loss rooted in information warfare.
Right. We have to revisit the essential military maxim here. The one with the best information wins. And this is humanity's fundamental, tragic flaw throughout the entire war.
We were fighting completely blind.
The PPDC treated the Kaijus as simple, random beasts. No reasoning, no strategy, no command structure.
They were just monsters that came out of a hole to break things at random.
So their strategy was just Kill them and wait for the next one. A purely reactive and ultimately doomed strategy.
That profound, fatal misunderstanding cost us everything.
Everything. While we were treating them like dumb animals, the enemy, the precursors, they knew everything about us. They were running one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations in history.
And their method of intelligence gathering was just chillingly effective.
It was. Thanks to the precursors' complex hive mind, and critically, their ability to salvage and download the combat memories from every single fallen kaiju and organic version of our own neural handshake, they cataloged every single piece of data.
So they knew the precise location of our Shatterdomes.
They knew the exact armor composition of our Jaegers.
And every single tactical weakness in our operating procedures.
They deliberately played the long game. They fostered our human arrogance, allowing us to get confident, letting us rely on our brute force and speed.
Treating them like predictable animals.
Right. Before striking the final surgical blow, the assault on the Hong Kong Shatterdome, where Crimson Typhoon was so tragically caged, was not a wild brawl. It wasn't a random attack by two large beasts.
It was a sophisticated special operations mission, designed and executed to dismantle our best remaining units.
The sources make it absolutely clear. The enemy sent two assassins custom designed for the job, and the counter-design specificity is just terrifying.
They analyzed our 4 remaining Titans, Cherno Alpha, Striker Eureka, Gypsy Danger, and Crimson Typhoon, and created perfect targeted killers to maximize the destruction and ensure our doom.
This wasn't combat, it was strategic assassination.
Let's just detail the precision of that counter strategy because it shows how utterly they understood our technology. Look at the matchups. For Cherno Alpha, our massive, immovable, fortress-like Russian tank.
They sent Otachi, armed with a highly corrosive specialized acid.
And that acid wasn't random bile.
No, it was strategically designed to dissolve the specific heavy layered alloys and the thick reactor armor plating that defined Cherno Alpha's defense. The Kaiju literally spat dissolution at the most fortified target we had.
Okay, and for Striker Eureka, our sleek, most advanced, digitally reliant machine in history.
They sent Leatherback,
which was equipped with a massive organic electromagnetic pulse.
The EMP was the only way to instantly negate Striker's high-sensitivity, digitally controlled system. It wasn't about physical combat at all. It was about weaponized signal disruption.
They neutralized the technology before they even engaged the metal.
They knew exactly which buttons to press to shut down our champions.
So we turn to the final victim of that assassination squad, Crimson Typhoon.
The precursors analyzed its core unrepeatable strength, its untouchable speed, its triple arms, and that unique irreplaceable neural connection of the Wei Tang triplets. They calculated the risk. They couldn't beat the robot in a straight spinning fight. They knew the steel was too fast.
They understood that the true threat wasn't the metal.
No, it was the pilots. Therefore, the strategic mandate was clear. They had to bypass the hardware entirely and achieve the perfect murder of the software.
But how? How do you hit the pilots when the Jaeger is moving so fast and defending itself with 3 spinning arms? I mean, that cockpit is a tiny moving target.
And that's where Otachi's design comes in. Our sources confirm that Otachi came equipped with a specific, highly adapted nightmare tool for this precise job. A tail tipped with a massive hydraulic claw.
So it wasn't a natural appendage.
No, think of it as a biological weapon system. That tail wasn't designed for hitting or whipping opponents across the harbor.
And what was it for?
The hydraulic claw was specifically designed for ripping, for crushing the highly reinforced structure of the con pod. Otachi didn't engage in a wild fight. It endured the Jaeger's speed, it took hits from its vicious arm blades, and it waited.
Waited for what?
For the one precise moment of vulnerability, the momentary lapse in the triplets' synchronized defense.
And it launched what can only be described as a sniper attack right through the chaos of the battle.
Exactly. The tail, guided by precursor intelligence, struck straight to the head. The claw bypassed the armor, crushed the con pod, the cockpit killing the Wei Tang triplets instantly.
It extinguished the unique, non-repeatable consciousness that gave the colossal, custom-built machine life.
That was the only way they found to stop the most advanced, specialized piece of hardware on the planet. Extinguish the humans that gave it life.
We didn't lose due to a lack of strength, or because the Jaeger was poorly designed, or even because the pilots were slow.
We lost because we fundamentally underestimated an enemy that studied us, analyzed our core irreplaceable strength, and created the perfect counter strategy to ensure our absolute, inevitable doom.
The machine was strategically perfect, but its reliance on 3 irreplaceable lives made it the single greatest fated liability humanity possessed.
So what does this all mean? When we look at the twisted wreckage of Crimson Typhoon and reflect on its life of spectacular victories followed by instant crushing defeat, what is the ultimate lesson here? It is a cruel, almost poetic irony that China's most advanced, most unique, and most successful Jaeger, built by a collaboration of global superpowers, was ultimately the main victim of a lesson written by a Chinese general, Sun Tzu, more than 2,500 years ago in the art of war.
The ultimate tragic lesson, crystallized in the catastrophic failure of the machine and the death of the Wei Tang brothers, is contained in this central strategic doctrine.
Sun Tzu states, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat."
And Crimson Typhoon was the very embodiment of human arrogance, the very embodiment of the first half of that quote. We knew ourselves perfectly. We knew we were faster, stronger, technologically superior. We built a custom-made Titan for a custom-made crew, the pinnacle of self-knowledge and technological prowess.
But we failed miserably at the second vital part. We didn't know the enemy. We underestimated the kaijus, treating them like simple, disorganized animals, when in reality, the precursors were applying Sun Tzu's teachings better than we ever did. They utilized our own battlefield data. They found the single irreplaceable weakness of our champion, the non-repeatable pilots, and they struck with surgical precision where we couldn't possibly defend ourselves.
So Crimson Typhoon is not a monument to weakness.
No.
It is a tragic reminder of human arrogance. Brute, reactive force is utterly useless if your enemy is analyzing your strategy, studying your blueprints, and playing chess while you're just throwing punches.
The enemy optimized the Hong Kong attack to ensure the Jaeger's fall was inevitable the second the Kaiju entered the water. The unique connection that made the triplets the ultimate operational software was precisely what made them the most vulnerable and ultimately the most targeted part of the machine.
The tragedy is that the perfect design was doomed not by its flaws, but by its singular, unrepeatable perfection. Perhaps, had we heeded the strategic wisdom of the ancients before building the giants of the future, had we focused on redundancy over singularity, the tragic, fated end of the Wei Tang brothers might have been avoided. But in the end, confidence betrayed us, and the perfect weapon met its perfect, calculated murder.